If you had told the young Sam Stein, he said, 15 years ago that he'd be editing Bill Kristol saying that there needs to be, popular and legal and congressional resistance to the use of the military at home and abroad, untethered use of the military, he wouldn't have quite believed it. It was a semi-fair point.
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. A few housekeeping items, a few things to be excited about. We have a new member of the Bulwark coming here in a couple weeks, but the news is out. It's Catherine Rampell. She was an economics columnist for the Washington Post and a co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC. She's a new mother, so she's been out on maternity leave. But when she's back, she's coming back with us with a new newsletter focused on economics. She's been on the show several times, but she'll be appearing on here more to talk about all things that are happening with the economy, which I think is going to be a big story in 2026 and beyond. You might remember her from daring Scott Jennings to do the Elon Musk Hitler salute on CNN a couple months ago. She's a spitfire. She's great. We love Catherine. So excited to have her on board. If you're not, subscribed to our newsletters, this is your time. Go to thebulwark.com and get signed up on the newsletters as well. Also, I mentioned this before periodically, but we have this Bulwark Takes feed now for folks who need even more than the daily podcast. Sometimes it's just rapid response stuff to the news. Sometimes it's other interviews that just kind of don't fit into our podcast timeline. Today's guest, Bill Kristol, does on every Sunday a live interview that goes onto that feed. This Sunday he was with Ryan Goodman of Just Security, some very serious legal talk about Trump's foreign and domestic military actions. I did a little bit more frou-frou stuff, okay? But I was on with KFC Barstool. It's one of the original Stooly Barstool bros, and we talked about how the Dems can do better with that demo. And I think that there's a lot of misconceptions out there about how far away the Dems are. I think that they could do much better with some of these guys. Anyway, check that out if you're interested in that. And lastly, today's show is a doubleheader. I don't know, Bill Kristol, if you ever would have thought this. It's back-to-back Bill Kristol and Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda in segment 2. She's reanimating her father's Committee for the First Amendment. And I was excited to have her on to talk about it. Giddy, really, to have her on to talk about it. And so there you go. Bill Kristol, what do you think? Editor at large. It's Monday. It's you, but it's also you and Jane Fonda today. Would you have seen that coming 20 years ago?
Not entirely. I mean, of course, we're fellow boomers, I guess. And
that's true.
She's a little older, but we're contemporaries. And I remember watching her father in some excellent movies. And he was a big free speech defender, I think, during the McCarthy years, right? I mean, kind of courageously, I think. And Catherine Rampell is a great addition to us. I wouldn't just include her as housekeeping. I'm just going to say that. I have a high, I'm going to curry favor. I'm going to curry favor, assuming she's watching. I'm going to curry favor with her right now, making clear that I dissent from that relegation. Okay. But that's okay. That's okay, Tim.
This is why we need Catherine Rampell. This is why we need, more women. So I don't do these microaggressions.
No, I wasn't even thinking about the gender thing, honestly.
I will say about Jane Fonda, we talked about this a little bit. I knew nothing about Jane Fonda, it turns out. And it's one of these things where, like, in life, you get people have, like, some people just become like memes or characters. In the right, I just got this vision of her passed down to me that was like totally wrong, actually, it turned out, about Jane Fonda. I don't know. She was, as you said, it was more your era, so you maybe lived through it all. But
the photo she allowed to be taken, I guess, I think I've got this right, in 72 maybe, in Hanoi with a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun, which presumably was being used to shoot down American pilots. That was very bad. She then reinvented herself with all the, the diet stuff and all, and exercise, I guess. And I think she sort of apologized for what she did in the 70s and, visited McCain and so forth. But so I'm okay. I'm okay with her.
And ended up being kind of right, though, about the war broadly. Maybe not about the anti-aircraft
But you shouldn't stand with the actual North Vietnamese.
Correct.
Just going to say, I don't want to sound too old school neocon here, but it's kind of like, it's a little bit,
we needed you to represent that point of view on the Kristol and Fonda. And I'll just say, Fonda, the only thing she was disappointed about is that neither of us are really Republicans anymore, because she was excited to have Republicans in the tent for the new effort. So anyway, stick around for that. All right, the real news. Military's invading Chicago and Portland, I guess, against or over the objections, rather, of the local political officials. I thought that this was a republic that we were living in. Apparently not, or maybe still, thanks to some judicial rulings. In Chicago, we have J.B. Pritzker. I guess we'll start there. This was J.B. last night. We must now start calling this what it is, Trump's invasion. It started with federal agents. It will soon include deploying federalized members of the Illinois National Guard against our wishes, and it will now involve sending in another state's military troops, Texas. I call on Governor Abbott to immediately withdraw any support for this decision and refuse to coordinate with the administration. So there it is. And there was a period of time where it's thought maybe they're backing off this a little bit. They're going to go into red states where they had, where the National Guard was welcomed, where there weren't these constitutional issues. You talked about this stuff with Goodman yesterday. I'm wondering what your top thoughts are.
I thought Andrew Egger put it well in the morning newsletter. We really have the rule of law and the rule of Trump, and the two which have been in tension with one another, and rule of Trump has been creeping up against the rule of law, you might say. They're now in just full-fledged conflict, I think, sort of head-on, collision. We're now at a different point, I guess the way I put it, than we were maybe a month ago when, as I said, these things were all happening. Authoritarianism was moving, but now we really have the real moment of crisis, I would really say.
Yeah. The rule of law side has had a momentary victory so far, at least in Oregon, over the rule of Trump. And I think it's just worth really focusing on what we've seen here. It's Karen Immergut. She is a Trump-appointed judge in Oregon, 2019, appointed by the Trump administration. That's important. She's twice now blocked the administration's attempt to send troops over the objections of local officials. Local officials, called for or filed emergency injunction. This was Immergut in one of her rulings. In this case, and unlike in Newsom, so she's contrasting with California, plaintiffs provided substantial evidence that the protests at the Portland ICE facility were not significantly violent or disruptive in the days or even weeks leading up to the president's directive on September 27th. Furthermore, this country has a long-standing and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach, especially in the form of military intrusion into civil affairs. She kind of frames that up even really from from a more conservative judicial perspective. And the whole ruling is worth reading, and she's very strong on this. We'll see what happens when the rubber meets the road. The MAGA folks are all saying, the judge isn't in charge of the military, we are. And that it could end up being in Oregon, really, where this comes to a head.
Now, it's an excellent opinion, and people really should read it. It's not super long, but it's very 30 pages or something, but it's very tightly argued. It's funny. I heard her name when this case appeared last week, and I thought, why do I know that name a little bit? I don't know every district judge in the country by any means, especially out in Oregon. And it turned out I vaguely remembered her name because she was as a young lawyer, went to work for Ken Starr when he was special counsel in 1998, and she was the person who deposed Monica Lewinsky.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Starr didn't want to do it himself. For kind of obvious reasons.
Yeah, sure.
It's more seemly to have. And so Karen Immergut. Then she was George W. Bush U.S. attorney for 4 or 5 years, I think. So not a bleeding heart liberal and a tough. I remember a couple of lawyers I know when she got the case thinking, "Oh, we could have gotten a better draw out there," And excellent opinion, really worth reading. This thing of the MAGA reaction, which Steve Miller embodies, I suppose, or leads. That, the Trump's in charge of the military. He's commander in chief. They're throwing that term around a lot. Yeah. Think about what that says for a minute. They're not saying that he's commander in chief when we're fighting a war abroad, and therefore the judiciary has to be extremely restrained and second guessing things, which is a reasonable position sometimes. They're saying he is commander in chief of the military here in the United States, but the military is not. He's not commander-in-chief of law enforcement in the United States. And the use of the military in the United States is very limited, both by law and tradition, and implicitly, at least, by the Constitution. And so it's so revealing of how far MAGA world has gone to just embracing, I don't know what to call it exactly, Caesarism is one term that they use in political science, sort of, that's just dictatorship, maybe. He just gets to use the military in the United States, wherever he wants, whatever he wants, without regard to what the facts are, without regard to all the legal niceties, what the governors who are elected officials in their state think. And we're also supposed to say, okay, he's commander in chief. I guess he just gets to deploy forces against American citizens. This is not just to help ICE arrest, that's problematic too, incidentally, to arrest undocumented immigrants. These people who are protesting, so far as we know, are, I assume, overwhelmingly American citizens whom the military is going to be doing what against? Fighting?
Yeah. It calls to mind the Mark Milley speech that he gave about how, about how the American military is different and they don't pledge an oath to a dictator, to a wannabe dictator, and talks about the traditions and just like how counter what this administration is saying to kind of those traditions. More on Miller. He got into a little tiff with our colleague Sam Stein on social media over the weekend. Steve Miller wrote this about Immerget. Legal insurrection. It's interesting that they appointed an insurrectionist to be a district court judge, but their decision, they'd like insurrectionists, I guess. Legal insurrection, Steve Miller says. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, not an Oregon judge. This is an organized terrorist attack on the federal government and its officers, and the deployment of troops is an absolute necessity to defend our personnel, our laws, our government, public order, and the republic itself. Sam quoted him saying, top official in Trump White House calls a decision from Trump-appointed judge an organized terrorist attack on the federal government. Stephen said to Sam, you are repugnant. I mean, not wrong, but not correct in this situation in particular.
That was harsh.
We'll see how this all shakes out, but like just the escalating rhetoric and the threats here, like this notion that like a judge that they appointed saying that they've not created a rationale for taking over the Oregon National Guard is an act of insurrection that potentially they're complicit in an organized terrorist attack that requires the administration to crack down on it. And the kind of other text around all of this, you talked about this a little bit with Ryan Goodman, was this national security presidential memorandum that people were talking about, NSPM 7, which is about domestic terror and how the U.S. now, it essentially is this memorandum saying that the federal government will put together a strategy for investigating and disrupting any organizations that foment political violence, that speak out against it. I mean, it's a pretty alarming trajectory.
I mean, the memorandum is alarming for everyone they can go after. But, I hadn't really focused till you read just now Miller's post. Legal insurrection. I mean, the normal thing any other White House would say, or even this White House, or even Trump in the first term at least would have said, is mistaken decision by a judge, very regrettable. We expect to prevail on appeal to the Supreme Court. This is...
Biden or Bush would have said very regrettable. Trump would have said loser, loser judge, idiot.
But legal insurrection really lays the groundwork for obviously ignoring judicial rulings that are insurrectionist, for I don't know what, removing judges who are insurrectionist. I mean, are they also subject to this national security memorandum and can be arrested? I mean, it shows how far we've gone. And no one, of course, God forbid, any Republican member of Congress or anything senator should, say something about maybe someone on one of the judiciary committees, say something about how this is inappropriate for the number two person, really the number one person on the White House staff to say. So it shows how far we have gone down this path. Very bad path. Very bad path.
This episode of the Bulwark Podcast is brought to you by Wild Grain. Wild Grain is the first break from frozen subscription box for artisanal breads, seasonal pastries, and fresh pastas. Plus, all items conveniently bake in 25 minutes or less. Unlike store-bought, Wild Grain uses a slow fermentation process that's easier on your belly, richer in nutrients and antioxidants, and made with simple ingredients that you can pronounce. Wild Grain's boxes are fully customizable, and they're constantly adding seasonal and limited-time products for you to enjoy. In addition to their classic box, they now feature a gluten-free box and a plant-based box. I was on one of these trips, maybe it was Toronto or something, and I came back and opened up the freezer. I was like, look at this. Look at all these frozen baked goodies. I was wondering if my husband got too deep in the gummies and decided that, he needed to go out and get some sweet treats while I was gone. But no, it turned out our new sponsor, Wild Grain, had sent us some frozen gifts, and they're correct. The little pastries, some cinnamon rolls, little breakfast items. I never do that. I never make cinnamon rolls in the house. Made some over the weekend. Tastes yummy, smells great. I didn't have to go to my ladies' weights class after to even it out, but it was worth it. This fall, treat yourself and your loved ones to warm sourdough breads and seasonal baked goods from Wild Grain. They have apple cider donuts and pumpkin cinnamon biscuits. So get them before these seasonal items sell out. For a limited time, Wild Grain is offering our listeners $30 off the first box, plus free croissants in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/thebulwark to start your subscription. You heard me. Free croissants in every box and $30 off your first box when you go to wildgrain.com/thebulwark. That's wildgrain.com/thebulwark, or you can use promo code THEBULWARK at checkout. Don't miss their seasonal products. Right now, go get them. noticed a post from you over the weekend about Stephen Miller's various, because he was just off the chain, and I've just read part of the various things that he was talking about, but tweets that are like inciting, the situation, exacerbating the situation in a bunch of these scenarios in Chicago where there were protests against ICE. Miller continues to be out there like looking for pretexts to send these troops in, and obviously that's kind of the crux of this fight in Oregon, is that it's like their rhetoric is not matching the reality, right? Like they're trying to argue that there was this emergency, there's this violence on the ground, and it seems like that Judge Emmergate is basically saying, well, yeah, like if there was violence, I would have let you do this, but there hasn't been. And so they want violence. They're looking for violence. You write, Stephen Miller is so desperate for a Reichstag fire moment. That keeps getting thrown around. I thought it might be useful for some listeners to like, what do you actually mean by that? Because there was a period of time where I had the impression that Reichstag fire was representing like a false flag, like the Nazis basically started the fire, then blamed it on the communists as a way to grab power. But it seems like as history has gone on, I think that was a misconception, and that the Reichstag fire moment really just means that something happens that then leads the wannabe authoritarian to assert power.
Yeah, I mean, shortly after Hitler takes power, I guess, or becomes chancellor, I think it's the end of February 1933, the Reichstag, the German parliament, is set on fire. I think at the time, the guy who was arrested seemed to be an anarchist of some kind, and kind of a disturbed person acting alone, so far as one could, as historians now think. The left assumed it was a false flag thing at the time. It may not have been a false flag thing, but it was taken advantage of in a huge way by Hitler and the Nazis to basically pass the Empowering Act, whatever that's called. And anyway, that's where they began to really destroy the democracy over which Hitler was still kind of presiding, and begin the road towards totalitarianism. So the analogy, I suppose, would be there could be incidents in places that are not false flag. They're just unfortunate incidents, or maybe even some 6 left-wingers do something somewhere, and they use that as the excuse to consolidate power and purge opponents, and they really went all out against the left in Germany and et cetera. So,
and you can get overstated to like what their plan is with regards to purge, but they definitely want to use the power of the law to go after big donors, left-wing groups, any protest, organizations, right? Like, I mean, that is in addition to using it as a rationale to have the military in the streets.
Empirically, if I could say, there's just no question that ICE is provoking violence at this point. ICE is not solving a problem of violence. It theoretically could be the case. You and I might not like the deployment of ICE, even in these circumstances. We certainly might not like the National Guard being federalized, but it could theoretically be the case, and it was the case in LA in '92 when Bush used the National Guard, that there were terrible riots going on because of, in that case, the Rodney King decision, and there was a good reason to send in the Guard or whatever. ICE's deployment here is just clear from the way they're conducting themselves in Chicago. The instance with the helicopter raid on that apartment building was that early last week. They're provoking the violence. Their presence is provoking the violence. And beyond their presence, their actual actions are pretty purposefully at this point provoking violence. So it's in a funny way in this respect beyond the Reichstag fire, you might say, So yeah, but they want the violence. And I mean, I've got to say 98% of the protesters seem to me to be behaving with pretty impressive restraint, actually. There's been very little violence from the people who are protesting ICE. ICE has committed a lot more violent acts than the people protesting ICE.
Yeah. In Portland, that's why they picked Portland, because there were really violent protests in Portland. And some of that was back then. There was also the kind of Proud Boys were in the picture. So they're kind of right-wing militia groups and left, and they were fighting amongst themselves. So but like that was the case in 2020 in a way that hasn't been now. And yeah, I mean, some of the videos, the ICE, and there's some funny ones of the ICE, like the fat ICE guys, like chasing around the guy on the bike in Chicago and stuff. Like, there's some funny videos, but there are like some very alarming videos about and obviously I believe it was in New York, where the ICE agent pushes down the woman that is really upset that her husband has been taken away, undocumented. I guess allegedly, supposedly an undocumented migrant, and his wife is pushed to the ground. And then they fired the guy. And I think I mentioned that on either this or the Next Level podcast. Then a couple days later, they unfired him.
Right.
Like, they brought him back. And it's just, so to your point about the provocation, like they're good with it. They want it.
And the ads that they're running and the glorification that Kristi Noem's putting out the videos. Yeah, as a single, I'll just ask.
She does look kind of weird in the workout video, I will say. I don't know. Maybe that's provoking, just kind of the way that it's sort of an uncanny valley, non-human kind of presence. But
yeah, has a single ICE agent been disciplined so far as we know, and in the months this has been going on, and with all the videos we have of really inappropriate to say behavior, to say the least behavior by them, I doubt it. And they're encouraging it, and the videos encourage it and glorify the use of violence by ICE. Again, there's none of the normal. We hope we don't have to use force. They don't even pretend that anymore. So
you wrote for one shot. You already mentioned Andrew's post on the rule of law versus the rule of Trump, which was very good. You also wrote about how this impacts the shutdown politics. I've been having these conversations with everybody that comes on. It's like it's sort of a tough call. Like on the one hand, it's going decently well for the Democrats, actually, the politics of this. If you look at the numbers, like that voters are either neutral or kind of, it's basically even, like as far as who's getting blamed for this, a little bit more towards Trump. It has, I think, elevated the salience of the rising healthcare premiums, which are going to be coming, this fall, have already started to come for some people. So that's good. And yet it's kind of like, well, is that really what the fight's over, right? Like some on the left are saying, like, is the reason really that you're not funding this government because of Obamacare subsidies, or is it because of Trump's lawlessness? And does the fight need to be elevated to that point? You write it like this: don't Democrats need to say, in light of new circumstances, that they will not vote to fund an administration that's trying to impose martial law at home and to start unauthorized and unjustified wars abroad? Don't Democrats need to demand that provisions curbing the administration's authoritarian moves, or at least provisions guaranteeing Congress votes on those authoritarian moves, need to be attached to legislation funding the government? Anyway, expand on that.
No, I mean, well, you said it. I mean, I say at the beginning that they've done a pretty good job on the healthcare fight, and the natural thing to do, and maybe ultimately, maybe I'm being a little provocative, I don't know, is to just keep fighting the healthcare fight. They're doing fine with it. But I just feel personally it's a little weird, and things have changed a lot since that healthcare strategy was devised a month ago, when it was pretty reasonable, or even when it began to be implemented, really, 2 weeks ago as the shutdown became imminent. And now we are in a genuine constitutional crisis and a genuine showdown between the rule of law and the rule of Trump. And somehow that has to be captured, I think, in what the Democrats say. Now, maybe you can let Pritzker and Newsom and others and the governor of Oregon make this case, and the men, Jeffries and Schumer, can keep talking about healthcare and very robotically on message. But it just feels weird to me at this point. And I do. Yeah. Can they actually prevail? Can they prevail on healthcare? Incidentally, I'm a little doubtful. Can they prevail on getting things onto these legislation? Who knows? But we don't. They haven't tried. I mean, we don't know. Are Republican senators going to be a little nervous, not even allowing a vote on the use of congressional authorization for the use of force? There are Republican senators, Ryan Goodman makes this point, who have a pretty long record of being pretty strongly in favor of Congress having a say on these sorts of things. Now, are they capable of totally collapsing in the wake of Trump's opposition? Yes, of course. So I don't know. I just feel like, at least for now, I thought I would put this out there. It's a little beyond probably what the traffic will bear for now politically, but I don't know. Another few days like what we've seen, congressional leadership can't be totally detached, so to speak, from what the governors are saying and from what's happening actually in the streets of Portland or Chicago.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know. I've been. It's sometimes it's hard to like, you can imagine and game out in your head how these sorts of political kind of moments will settle, like, into the kind of public consciousness, and like what people take away from them. I was pretty worried that the Democrats were going to find themselves like with internal dissension and not enough backbone to fight, and that it would end up kind of feeling rather limp. It doesn't feel that way, I guess, now. Again, I'm talking about what the arguments are, I still don't really know what the exit strategy is, but like, it does feel like they're dug in for a fight in a way that is useful for the moment. And I do think, to your point, I mean, depending on what happens in Portland and Chicago, and as these guys escalate, that could change, their posture and positioning even more. I do think that's a good thing to raise. Do you have any other shutdown thoughts?
Well, just my only other point I make this at the end, just as a suggestion in a way at the end of the little piece, is that we have the shutdown on the one hand. That's sort of what's happening in Washington. We have the actual constitutional crisis happening out in the country, but with the Trump administration as well. And then we have this No Kings protest planned for little under 2 weeks from now, which I think will be very big. It could be bigger than the previous one. I think millions of people. And if you think about the resistance to Trump, there's sort of a legal side, there's a, let's call it political side, and a popular side. And I do think these could all be kind of brought together in a way that they haven't quite been yet over the 8 months or so of this administration, over the next 2 weeks in a way that kind of reinforce each other. So I think it's a bit of an opportunity just politically to build more momentum on the side of the resistance. Sam Stein, our colleague who edits the morning shots usually, was joking in Slack. If you had told the young Sam Stein, he said, 15 years ago that he'd be editing Bill Kristol saying that there needs to be, popular and legal and congressional resistance to the use of the military at home and abroad, untethered use of the military, he wouldn't have quite believed it. But I had to explain to him that, of course, it's all very different. No, I didn't really explain anything. It was a semi-fair point.
Well, it speaks to the seriousness of the moment, I think, that alignment has been found. The other thing that happened over the weekend from Trump on this front, it's just like in any other administration or era or moment, like Trump's speech to the Navy would just have been an all-consuming kind of conversation point. And, here we are half an hour into the show. We're getting to it. He gave a speech at the 250th anniversary of the Navy in Virginia. It was the Hales Naval Academy and a big win over Air Force the day prior in football. Hegseth was at that, doing selfies with the players afterwards. Trump called this speech a rally, and it very specifically in the context of a political rally. He was referencing the front row Joes or whatever. He's got people that go to his political rallies and the total number that he's done. And during this speech in front of the sailors, he says, we have to take care of this little gnat that's on our shoulder called the Democrats. He goes after Barack Hussein Obama. He talks about how his alcoholic doctor had said that that Trump was the best physical specimen between Obama and Bush. I mean, it is just a totally wildly inappropriate and incomprehensible speech from a president in front of the sailors in Virginia.
I gotta say I didn't watch it. How do we have a sense of how the sailors reacted? Were they weren't as stone-faced as the generals?
They were not stone-faced as the generals. I would say I would give them mixed credit. There was definitely some hooting and hollering around Trump being a great physical specimen and some of that sort of stuff. And Trump did kind of give them an opportunity to boo Barack Hussein Obama, and they did not take that. Similar, I think the little gnat was kind of quiet after he started talking with the little gnat. So. I guess I didn't go to the academy. I didn't go to the academy, so I don't know exactly what appropriate behavior it was there. There was certainly some hooting and hollering, though, in the crowd, but maybe it was maybe not the most alarming that it could have been. How about that?
That's good. I mean, I sort of expected the general officers to be, very disciplined, but you don't know what's going on down in the ranks and among very young sailors. So I'm hopeful that there's a broader sense throughout the military. It's really important that there be, obviously, that this stuff is inappropriate. They have to put up with it. He's the commander in chief, as they always remind these young troops. So they've got to be respectful. But they don't have to internalize the notion that that he's the person they work for, as opposed to the chain of command, which he's at the top of, and the oath they take is to the Constitution, not to him.
Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping you and your family's personal information from data broker websites. They know your privacy is worth protecting. So you can sign up and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts take it from there. It's not just a one-time service. Delete Me is always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. Somebody who's out there online, this is something that obviously I am conscious of, and at some level, I'm letting it rip on social media. So people are going to know my thoughts, but there's still elements that you want to keep private. There are, you can become the target of a bot attack. They can just come to try to get your information and create a big hassle for you. I've had to deal with this a couple of times, and I've been happy to have Delete Me on board to help me fight back against the assholes out there that are trying to screw with our data. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/bulwark and use promo code BULWARK at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/bulwark and enter code BULWARK at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/bulwark, code BULWARK. It is just, it probably goes without saying, but just like the whole context of all this, like the idea of simultaneously I'm sending troops into these cities to go after so-called left-wing agitators while giving a speech in front of, rank and file, and talking about the Democrats as if they're the problem that needs to be taken care of, followed by the speech to the generals, where he's talking about the enemy within being scarier than the enemy without. And I mean, all of that together, paints, it's quite an alarming picture.
No, totally. And I was wondering, I don't know if this was scheduled a long time ago, if there was some 250th anniversary somehow, think of the Navy that he was, going to go to. But if this were happening in a foreign country, speaks to the General Officer Corps on a Tuesday, and then was that just this past week? I've totally lost track of things. Yeah. And then 5 days later speaks to sort of enlisted, or the rank and file, let's just call it, of one of the services. You get a sense that, you know what? He thinks the military is pretty important to his agenda, to his authoritarian agenda, to his staying in control, maybe ultimately. And he's pretty, systematically is too strong. But in his way, he seems to be giving a lot of speeches to the military. Why is that? And paying a lot, and Hegseth, we know, is paying a lot of attention to promotions within the military and so forth. So again, he called it a rally, which, is interesting. But in a way, if you were just giving rally speeches, one would be less alarmed, right? I mean, to random people out there,
Here's maybe one other, whether to be alarmed about this or to laugh at it, I don't know. I think I'm going to be alarmed by it. Are you familiar with Scott Adams? Do you know that guy?
Just the name, yeah.
Okay. Well, he wrote the Dilbert cartoon.
Yeah, right.
This is the kind of thing where you don't really want to care about what these people think. But Scott Adams was in 2015 a prominent early Trump advocate,
right?
Like when it was kind of comical to be for Trump, really. And he was there at the beginning, and so he gained a huge following among Trump supporters, right? As somebody who's like, hey, here's a Hollywood guy that'll put his name out there, and he's gotten increasingly unhinged, and yet he maintains an important following. And I like to monitor this stuff because a lot of times you're seeing from Stephen Miller and stuff. Oh, it's the left that is calling us fascists, and we need to crack down on that because that is an incitement to violence. Well, here's one of Donald Trump's biggest supporters over the weekend, Scott Adams of the Dilbert cartoon.
By far the best form of government, if you could get it. Now, the problem is there's no way to guarantee that that's what you're getting, but if you could get it, the best form of government would be a authoritarian strongman who had your best interests in heart. Which turns out to be Trump. Is he an authoritarian? Yes. Is he a strong man? I'd say yes. Yes, he is. Is he benevolent in the sense that although he's tough, everything he does clearly is for the benefit of the public?
At least he's benevolent. 1.3 million followers there for Scott Adams. I guess there's points for just saying it that they're like, but I do think it's important to just like call attention to this, which is like they're saying it. Trump has 2028 hats. One of his biggest supporters in 2015 is like, we want him to be a benevolent authoritarian strongman. He is a benevolent authoritarian strongman. There's no pushback, really. I mean, there are people that will push back if it's the left that says it, and say that they're doing hyperbole. But when it's from inside the house, I guess I'm a little alarmed that they're putting that into the public discourse.
Wait till Trump reposts it. That'll be the real moment. But no, I hadn't known about that. I mean, I knew who Adams was, that he was Trumpy and all that, but that is striking. Now the cards are all, like in blackjack or in poker. The deal is cards are face up at this point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no mystery about what their hand is and how they're going to play it.
It's a concerning thing. I tried to bring Ken Burns to the dark place last week, and I couldn't do it because he's, he's seen it all. It couldn't be any worse than it was in Charleston during the revolution or whatever. And that's great. That's great. We definitely have been in darker places than in this moment. But one of the things he said that struck me that's just I've really been sitting with all weekend is like that some of the principles of the revolution, of the founding, like the people advancing them didn't even fully believe them. I mean, obviously based on their behavior with slaves and stuff, but like that there was this kind of momentum or inertia of like, if you put a powerful idea out into the world, people pick it up and you kind of manifests right. itself. Right. And he was talking about that in the positive way about the ideas of the founding. And I'm increasingly worried about that today, right? The inverse of that like these things are being put into the ether in a way that they were not prior.
I totally agree. I think it's really an important point. I've been very struck. I don't think we even talked about this really much, but I'm very struck along a parallel path or the same path really, which is, I mean, authoritarianism has a certain natural support out there. There are things it appeals to in the human soul, and especially in some people's souls, and especially maybe in this current moment for various reasons. And once it gets some momentum, people do sign on. We know this from history, right? It's not like everyone was, on board with Mussolini or Hitler or anyone else. Hugo Chavez, the moment he showed up, or even when he first got elected, maybe. And it's normalization isn't even a strong enough term because, of course, he's been elected president twice. So it's way beyond just normalization of it as kind of just a movement in America. But no, I think I couldn't agree more. It's really bad ideas can have momentum as unfortunately, I don't know if as much as good ideas, but almost as much as good ideas.
Yeah. Okay.
And the founders knew this. It's just to take a second on the founders, which Ken Burns knows a lot about, obviously a ton about. They were very worried. They didn't think, once we set this thing up, there's never a chance of demagogues taking over or popular passions getting out of hand. Right. They spent a huge amount of time and effort worrying about constructing institutions to check that, to guardrails against that. And then they say also, you know what? We still depend on the public ultimately and elites. They don't quite say it this way, but I would say that's what they think, to stop this as well. We need humans, not just guardrails, to stop these tendencies, which are always going to be there, or possibilities, which are always going to be there.
All right. Well, assuming we avoid the authoritarian strongman coming to fruition, we do have some rank politics ahead of us, and I just want to just touch on two things really quick before I lose you. Well, first, looking ahead to next. Actually, we'll get ahead to next year's midterms with Geoff Duncan and the Georgia race that Lauren Egan wrote about second, because it's coming up here in the Virginia governor's race. We talked about it last month. You're in Virginia. Abigail Spanberger seems to be running a strong race against a quite absurd, ridiculous Republican challenger in Winsome Sears. Some news over the weekend, though, kind of down ballot, where the Democratic Attorney General candidate Jay Jones had sent a bunch of just really fucking disgusting texts about how his opponents, kids, were little Nazis, and how he wanted to piss on the graves of his opponents. And he had 2 bullets, and it was the Republican speaker and Hitler and Pol Pot or something. The Republican speaker would get both. I mean, just it was private texts, maybe with somebody that he's flirting with, I've heard. So I don't know. It's kind of a Corey Lewandowski type behavior there. So it was private text, not a public. Even still, horrendous. And, I think that the Democrats, in a number of ways, we've seen this from the top of the ballot all the way to the bottom. There's a little bit of a lack of seriousness sometimes in dealing with the threat that we are dealing with. It was not a secret that this guy was a ridiculous candidate, that he was running a primary. And I guess you tell me it was a close race, but I feel like there could have been, maybe a more formidable opposition against somebody that was going to embarrass the Democrats to this degree.
Yeah, I mean, I voted for his opponent in the primary, I'd like to say, who lost 51-49. So, the opponent was a totally reasonable, moderate Democrat. What a great guy, just more like Spanberger. I mean, Jones, not only just when the stuff broke, he didn't really apologize right away, right? Didn't it take him a while to be dragged into a more serious apology? So behaved very badly. Look, honestly, if early voting hadn't begun, I'd be very much in favor of everyone pressuring him to get off the ballot and let the Democrats nominate, presumably the person who got 49% of the vote. I feel like it's close to disqualifying, but I guess with early voting having begun, it's just very, very hard to figure out how you would, people have to go back and vote again, and how do you keep track? It gets pretty crazy, right? So I don't know if that can work. So here we are. I don't know how much it'll hurt. I don't think it'll hurt Spanberger too much. So in Virginia, we vote independently for the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. So people might split their ballot down at the AG level and vote for
and split ballots have happened in Virginia.
Yes, and I'd say the AG, who's the incumbent, is the most reasonable version of Youngkinism that you're going to get. I mean, it's not, he's gone along with a lot of stuff I wouldn't go along with, and gone along with Youngkin going along with a lot of stuff that one shouldn't go along with. But he's not, I think, it wouldn't be fair to say he's like a full bore Trumpy type. So I do think a certain number of swing voters might switch over to him in the general. I think they can separate this Spanberger from this. With Spanberger, for some reason, they're all reluctant to, they criticize him pretty harshly. But then the Republicans intelligently, from their point of view politically, kept saying, well, but are you in favor of him dropping out? And then none of them was quite willing to say that. So
right, the timing. It was good, Oppo. To me, the lesson, because like who the Virginia Attorney General is not really that important to me as living in Louisiana. But to me, the lesson is just, again, going back to there has been a reticence, and I tie this to the Biden and element parts of Kamala. There's a reticence among kind of the Democratic cultural elites of like, we've got to circle the wagons. The threat is so great that we got to stick with our side. You know what I mean? We don't want these internal fights breaking out. Like we don't, and that is the wrong lesson, right? Like, I mean, and we've seen how that has backfired several times, which is like, no, if there's a Democrat that is going to harm the party or that is going to harm the country or that is not or that is whatever, using bad judgment, like they should be called out for it, right? Like there should be a concerted effort to move to stronger options. And this is kind of a micro version, I think, based on what I've heard in Virginia, is that it wasn't like a great secret. I don't know if people knew that his texts were this disgusting, but it wasn't a great secret that this was not maybe the strongest candidate they should have. All right, in Georgia, Lauren Egan went there, our colleague, to cover Geoff Duncan, former Republican lieutenant governor who acted extremely admirably in the face of Trump in 2020 when he tried to overturn the votes in Georgia, then endorsed Kamala Harris, gave quite a good speech, I thought, at her convention about kind of the moral imperative for why he decided to do that. Good guy. I've got to know him a little bit. And he is now running as a Democrat in the Georgia Democratic primary. Mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, is the other, is I guess the leader in the polls right now, would be the most prominent candidate. There are a couple other people in the race. I was wondering what you made of Egan's story and of Geoff Duncan's attempt here.
I'm very encouraged that he's doing it. I mean, I think I may have talked to him about it. Actually, we were on a bus together going to the Republicans or ex-Republicans for Kamala Harris event in Pennsylvania, where we all stood on the stage, kind of, but 20 of us kind of didn't seem to help much in Pennsylvania. But anyway, and Geoff gave an excellent speech there too. And I think we were talking about like what party we in now these days and so forth. And I repeated, I believe this was your original point way back when, and you were early on this, that, you know what, if you're with the Democrats, you might as well just join the Democrats, and then you can maybe influence the Democrats. And someone like him, who's been elected statewide, can run as a Democrat. So he's doing it. I'm not taking any credit for this. I'm just saying I'm very sure. And I don't know if he's going to win or not. I mean, running against the former governor of by far the largest city in the state, who's a Democrat, is obviously, it's a bit uphill. But I'm very encouraged. He should be encouraged to do it. He should be praised for doing it. And if he loses, he should still be praised for doing it. And I hope it doesn't deter other people from doing it. You know what? You lose once, maybe you win 2 or 4 years from now. Maybe someone else like you wins. Maybe you have a standing now in the party to be a player, be a figure and active in state level or the national level. So I'm very heartened by his decision to run. And right now the polls show him far behind, but it's natural that we'd start off that way. I don't know. What do you make of it?
I mean, look, I think that the model makes more sense in Kansas and in Georgia, right? Like, or in like a red or congressional district. And so I don't, like you, if he loses this primary, I don't think that should discourage the model. I think that maybe there are other districts where it would maybe make more sense. I think it could work for him in Georgia. I think obviously the black vote is like particularly significant in Georgia, and that's going to be a challenge for him. Like, is he going to be able to appeal to black voters? Maybe he will. I don't know. But I think that maybe the model is different in a state that's different demographically and politically. But it's also like Democrats want to win. A lot of Democrats want to win. I mean, there are certainly obviously ideologically motivated Democrats, but there are also Democrats who really, if you're in Georgia and you look at Brian Kemp's last years, Brian Kemp's been like about the most reasonable Republican out there, but he still passed a 6-week abortion law. If you're a Democrat, you're like, I would like somebody that will not that will at least, put in place a more reasonable restriction, when it comes to abortion. There are various other things. Democrats are sick of getting beaten. And I look at somebody like Keisha Lance Bottoms, and she said, and we'll see what kind of campaign she runs, but Lauren Egan asked her campaign about, Duncan making the argument about electability, and they sent her a poll from 2021, so it's a while ago, that showed that she had a 57% approval rating in Atlanta when she was mayor. And I was like, well, that's not that good, actually. I mean, if you're going to win as a Democrat in Georgia, you need to win big numbers in Atlanta. And I think that she has baggage from COVID and from the crime spike that happened. I'm not blaming that for her. Crime spike happened everywhere in 2020 and 21, but you can see the ads, And so, I don't know. I think that he has a legitimate electability case to make to Democrats.
And won't the Republican, and Tim, won't the Republican nominee, I haven't followed it closely enough, he won't be someone as reasonable as Kemp, right? It could well.
No, it's probably going to be Burt Jones. So on the Republican side, they got Raffensperger, who also acted honorably as Secretary of State. But it's kind of it's sort of a model of National Review, maybe National Reviewism versus Bulwarkism, where it's Raffensperger is going to run as a Republican. I think his campaign is hopeless, but good on him for doing it. And he'll almost certainly get beaten by Burt Jones. Unless, who knows, maybe he texted somebody crazy.
I don't know if that hurts you in the Republican primary in Georgia.
Maybe doesn't. Maybe doesn't.
Didn't they have some candidate just 2 years ago or something? Who was the guy who was?
Yeah, maybe doesn't. Yeah, Herschel. No, probably doesn't hurt you. So he is lieutenant governor who is fully on board for the Stop the Steal. It's just a straight insurrectionist, far right lunatic. And so, to your point about the importance of electability, having hit if you're a Georgia Democrat who's unhappy with Kemp, and you have the specter of this guy coming in, might be enough to get you to kind of broaden the tent a little bit. I don't know. We'll keep monitoring it, but I'm happy that Geoff has given it a shot. Anything else? Any final thoughts before we get to Jane Fonda? The people are ready for Jane Fonda.
I think the people want Jane Fonda. I'm willing to acknowledge that, and I think we're on good terms these days. I think we follow each other on Twitter or something, or did. Maybe we're on Blue Sky now, and
I think that she'd be excited to hang. I don't know. You're in LA soon, I heard, so maybe you guys can get together. That's everybody. That's Bill Kristol. He's here every Monday. All right, everybody. We are sold out of tickets to all of our shows on the fall tour, except for October 8th in Washington, D.C. I was on a call yesterday planning out what we've got in store for you. It's going to be fun. Obviously, JVL will be there, so there'll be elements of darkness. We're also bringing in Sarah McBride for a conversation with Sarah Longwell that I'm super excited for. Maybe we might get Will Summer up to talk about some of the crazy shit that's happening on the MAGA right. I've got some other plans in store for you, so it's not too late. Get your tickets now. Washington, D.C., October 8th. You go to thebulwark.com/events, thebulwark.com/events. I hope to see you all there. It's at the Lincoln Theater. Awesome venue. Appreciate them for hosting us. And so I hope to see you all in Washington, October 8th.